welcome to another edition of Sukrit Talks. Today we'll be talking about the impact of social media. So, as all of us are these days, we all have so many things installed on our phones, whether it be WhatsApp, Facebook, WeChat, there's heaps of things out there, and they all count as social media. You're always, amongst so many different kinds of people. So what can the impacts of that be? What kind of psychological impacts can that have? That's what we're going to delve into today. And we're joined by Monique today, who is an expert in the field of youth work. She's done a lot of amazing work around the world. So thanks for joining us today, Monique.
Thank you.
So let's just get straight into it. So when it comes to social media, what have you seen to be the biggest negative, I guess? Like, let's start with the negative, really, just to see, what's the main issue you see amongst especially the youth of the world today when they use social media?
So one of the things that really is really pronounced at the moment is the socially constructed ideologies that are being pushed through, and we're bombarded with different images and expectations and beliefs around what might be considered normal. If we look at who our role models might be, let's look at the language that's used and what type of dialogue comes out of some of those things that's constantly on our feeds. You look at Facebook, what comes up on your feed? But we look at the young women that are out there today, you look at who their role models might be. You've got the Kardashian, the whole clan, 5 of them, and what do they represent? You think about the over-sexualization of body image. The skirts are shorter, the heels are bigger, the makeup's a lot heavier, the hair's a lot bigger. And even for me as a female, thinking about if I was 15, 16, what would I think would be normal? If I didn't have the glamorous look and I couldn't afford it, if I didn't come from that upbringing, how would I feel trying to meet those expectations? That might be quite difficult for a young person to try and achieve. And then you think, who might be a positive role model? And where can they get that from?
Right, so would you say that, especially when you're young, you're trying to find yourself, you're trying to really kind of find your feet, then you look towards someone else, to kind of almost imagine yourself as incorporating some of their qualities into your life? Do you feel that that's kind of the...
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. So, I worked quite intensely with young people with significant drug and alcohol issues, significant mental health issues. And one of the things that always came up, and the constant throughout any type of relationship when we were trying to work with young people through their issues, was trauma around their sense of self and their sense of belonging. An adolescent is trying to discover their path, find out who they are in the world. You think as a child, they're more or less moulded by their environment. Their parents tell them what to do. The adults in their lives are the ones that give them the cues as to what the normal pathway through life might be. And then when you become an adolescent, you are on your pathway to developing your own autonomy. So that means you're becoming an adult. And you start to question for yourself. You have the ability to start thinking beyond, what has been told to you. And that's where that sense of self can become so important, especially when we're talking about engaging in risk-taking behaviours. I saw a lot of young people really challenging what they understood to be normal. And that was quite difficult because some of them were more vulnerable because some of them might have had abuse. There might have been some abuse. There might have been some bullying in their previous life. Maybe they had a learning difficulty. Maybe their parents weren't very supportive. Maybe they came from a really disadvantaged background. And so they didn't necessarily have a lot of modelling in their lives that were demonstrating positive functioning in society. And when we're talking about social media, I think that can manifest into some outward, sideways, negative behaviours as well. Because who are they? Like when a young person saying, "Who am I?" and they're trying to draw examples from society, you think about what it is. On social media, there's not a lot of good stuff on there, and sometimes it can be really catastrophic as well. You look at some of the images that come through just in the news. The world's going to end. This is going to happen to me. Watch out! Everything's fear-based. We're not empowered to make decisions that enable us to make the right choices a lot of the time.
So you talked about the need for a sense of belonging. Like there's a big theory out there, social theory, that I'm sure that you've come across too, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So with that, what I've seen when I was studying it was that around when you're in your youth, adolescence period, the most important thing is finding rapport with the people around you. So you mentioned some risk-taking behaviours that result when you don't have this sense of belonging. Like what kind of deeper issues have you seen there?
So one of the most concerning, I think, that I have observed is young people. There's something that's called the labelling theory, and there's this idea that, especially for young people, that if they're labelled a certain way, that we can sometimes just accept that that's who we are. And that's why the justice system is so careful around labelling and managing the sentencing of young people that are offending as well. And yet a lot of young people, when they're trying to find out who they are, and if they can't find that from their family, they can't find that from their school, they can't find that from society, can sometimes find it with other peers. And when I worked with a lot of young people that were involved in the justice system, I did find that most of them said that they joined gangs, specifically because that became their family. They were not judged, they weren't labelled, they weren't given these expectations around who they were. They were able to relate to what those other young people were doing. And when we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when we look at the pyramid, those that were most at risk of those risk-taking behaviours and being involved in gangs were those that were maybe not from very wealthy backgrounds. They were probably from a disadvantaged background. Maybe their parents were struggling through life, and they might have moved around a lot, might not have had a lot of social or family connections, or sometimes their parents might have imposed some ideologies on them that they couldn't really achieve, and so they acted out and they joined others that were similar to them and they could relate to.
Right, so it's kind of like rather than this virtual group mentality, they were able to find that in the real world in the sense of these gangs.
Connection. So that connection is so important. It's so important. Even as adults, it's so important. And we know that the brain isn't completely fused until you're 25, so really you're still an adolescent up until the age of 25, and we can still make mistakes. And every year that we progress, our brains do change along the way. And so the decisions that we might have made at 15 would be very different to when we're 18 as opposed to when you're 24. And if we are able to have positive and supportive but safe environments where we're allowed to explore our emotional issues as well as the physical environment, by recognising, for ourselves what we prefer and what we don't prefer, and what type of purpose and meaning we have in life, then I think that the term safety, emotional and physical safety, becomes even more important, because that's what helps us navigate and work through the silly decisions that we might have made at 13 and 15, and not having it have such a detrimental impact on our life later on. And it's okay to make mistakes. We're human. We're not perfect all the time, and I think that's what makes us beautiful. Those imperfections that we have. Mm-hmm. And I think, when we're talking about young people, let's actually make them feel safe. Let's actually teach them, rather than dictating and telling them. Like in Australia at the moment, we've got these lockout laws, and we're almost a police state. Yeah. We're dictated in our behaviour is so constrained that we're not allowed to explore our decisions and the consequences of those decisions anymore. And we're not learning from that. We're just being told. And so that's one of the things that sort of impacts negatively on the sense of empowerment and growth. When we're not allowed to learn.
Right, yeah, that's a great point, yeah. So, just to add to that, do you feel that the advent of social media also has impacted a lot on interpersonal relationships?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
If we think about society at the moment, we're so if we think about interpersonal communication, this is interpersonal communication right here. When we have a medium that's in between us, so let's say I pick up this vase and and then my communication goes through this vase. Yeah. It's already filtered. Yeah. And it also removes me from being directly accountable to you as well. And so my own personal opinion is that if we think about the amount of bullying that's happening at the moment, specifically trolling, cyberbullying, people aren't accountable. Yeah. We don't have to directly answer to you. There's no real consequence.
They kind of hide behind the...
Exactly. Yeah. So we think about, one of the principles of empowerment and supporting decision making is getting people to understand choices and how those choices have consequences. And when we have a medium between us, we don't necessarily have to be accountable or responsible for our actions.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, as we're talking, I guess, it's very clear that, that medium and that filter is the biggest barrier to really progressing forward as a person as well, really progressing and growing into the new version of yourself. So, as we're kind of delving deeper into this, what are the deeper psychological impacts you've seen of, maybe things like I've seen some people on social media come openly out and say, social media kind of took me towards the edge and really made me realize that I'm entering a depressed state of mind. So what are the deeper psychological impacts that you've seen in your experience that you could share with us today?
One of the inadvertent things that the fallacy of the social media identity creates is that people have this need to have 1 million likes, to have 1,000 friends, regardless of whether they know anything about the person. If they've got a following, it's that almost celebrity status that people are trying to achieve, and that's considered to be cool now. And when people don't have that, when they can't create a following of people, when they don't get 1 million likes on their Facebook page, it makes them feel inadequate. It can make them feel like they don't have any friends, that they have no connection to anyone, there's no meaning or purpose in their life because they're not as likable as anyone else. And so that can manifest itself into a lot of issues, specifically self-esteem. It can get into some really destructive internal dialogue where they can have some negative self-talk about who they are. They might tell themselves, well, no one likes me, I've only got 2 likes on my page, I've only got 100 friends, I don't have, my profile picture isn't as pretty as that other person's. And so we're always competing, we're always trying to achieve something that isn't necessarily real. And you hear about so many people that have cult followings on social media saying how fabricated and constructed it is. Like they go to such extensive lengths to create those pictures that that continues that following, and people get depressed. There's a whole range of young people out there at the moment that are, because of that dialogue that they're having with themselves around how little they are in society, they self-harm, they might lock themselves away in a room, they might push out the people that are in their lives at the moment. And depression isn't an easy thing to deal with, and we see it quite a lot in young people. And one of the things that I've noticed becoming a lot more pronounced is the incidence of self-harm as well, whether it's directly hurting themselves or whether it's using drugs and alcohol. Those things are really hurtful, and it's really a cry out for help. It's saying, I'm not okay. And it's okay to not feel like today is a good day all the time. When we think about happiness, that's a mood, not a constant state of being. And we have this idea that's pushed on us all the time that, that we have to be happy, that we have to have all these friends. We're human, and we are fluid and need to move with our environment. And sometimes it's okay to say, I'm not okay. But it's how you manage that as well that makes a huge difference as to whether it comes out sideways.
Right, yeah. So one thing that I've also seen is that, the people kind of escape to social media as well when they're faced with the struggles of life.
Yeah.
Like, they might feel like they're going to have a really sad moment. And at that moment, instead of really facing it, they run to like a messenger and they'll start chatting with someone.
Yeah.
Like, do you feel that really impacts people in the long term in that they don't ever really face themselves fully? Like, do you think that that's also a big problem, or?
Yeah, I think social media can sometimes act as a platform of escape.
Right.
And when people are experiencing, depression and stuff like that, sometimes, escaping can be drugs and alcohol or social media. And then the other thing as well is when we're experiencing a particular type of mood and we go online, often we're seeking something that relates to how we're feeling. And the way that it can come out positively is if, there are supportive groups. But then again, online, there's not a lot of control.
Right,
you don't necessarily get the professionals who are experienced and educated and knowledgeable about managing some of those things. And so I do sometimes get really concerned when young people go on and they're looking for the sites that aren't necessarily having a positive impact on their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always encourage them to seek professional help, because it's a reason why they're out there, and it's because it works. It's just finding the right match. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, like, if there's someone watching out there who is experiencing these things, who's thinking, okay, like, I've had a long day at work, or they've come back from uni, from school, they come back, they see their Facebook feed, and they think, oh, everyone's had such a great day, such a great week, I'm not going that well, or they just basically feel like they're reaching an edge. What would your advice be to that kind of, to a person in that kind of situation?
There's a lot of stuff that we can do for ourselves, and a lot of it can be around engaging in positive behaviours such as mindfulness, even meditation as well. There's been a lot of evidence to show that how beneficial it is on people's sense of well-being. There's a lot of really great books out there as well. One in particular that stands out is called Change Your Thinking. There's a lot of exercises in there. It's by Sarah Edelman.
Right, okay.
And it actually gives you tips and strategies on how you can actually work with the way that you feel about yourself, and I highly recommend that book. But also, if you're at school, go and speak to someone. Find someone that you trust, and someone who you believe will give you the professional etiquette to direct you in the right place. See a counsellor as well. I know a lot of people say, oh, but I've been to 6 counsellors. One of the things that I would say is that it's always about who the person is, and sometimes you might have tried a few, but don't feel like just because you've been to 5 that the world is over and you're not going to find someone. It is about rapport, and the way that it works is through that relationship. So find one that fits for you. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Monique.
It's okay.
So, just to wrap up, I think from our discussions, the main thing that we'd really like to say to you guys is, life can be incredibly lonely. It can be very difficult, but there's always people out there who are willing to lend you a hand, whether that be your family, your friends, or that be a person who's professionally able to help you out. So don't ever give up on that. There's always someone out there, and don't ever identify yourself as a bunch of text on any website in the world. You're worth a lot more than that. So till next time, all the best.